Hello all, and welcome back to a new episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now we are reviewing Severance Season 2, and today we are on episode 3, titled Who is Alive? If you haven't watched this episode yet, this is your spoiler alert. Please check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of our conversation. Okay, Sarah, kick us off with an episode summary for episode 3.
Mark, Helly, Irving, and Dylan search for answers.
I feel like they're constantly searching for answers. I mean, that's like the summary of the show, you know?
Right? We just copy and paste that for every episode and it would be accurate.
Yeah. And you know what? We're going to get to the final episode and probably still be searching for answers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. We are going to find some answers, but every time we find answers, we find more questions. Mm-hmm. So then the group has to keep searching for answers. It's the whole point of the show. And we're having a great time with it. So keep just searching for answers, guys. You're doing a great job.
Yeah. I mean, the show must go on and they need to keep making money. So they will never find their answers. Okay. So let's start off with our episode titles for episode 3. What is yours?
Mine is Hall Pass.
Ah, nice. Yeah. They get Hall Passes and go on a whole adventures in this episode.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They are using those Hall Passes, which I really appreciate. Because what's the point of a Hall Pass if you're not going to use it?
My episode title is Underbellies.
Ah, yes. Excellent.
All right. Well, let's share actually our high-level thoughts about this episode first, and then we'll give a spoiler alert and then dive in. So I know we gave a little mini one before, but we're actually going to just share our high-level thoughts about episode 3 first. Sarah, how did this episode land with you?
Gosh, I'm not sure how to talk about this episode without spoiling anything. There's a reason why the episode summary is the way that it is. Yeah, we like we were just talking about, we get some answers to some of the questions that we were asking, and then we get a lot more questions. And I think there's a lot of interesting character moments that are starting to kind of bubble up to the top. There's some interesting stuff going on with Milchick and Natalie that happened that I think is really interesting. And then we get another Helena harmony situation going on. And so I'm very curious how this episode is seeding a lot of things that is going to pay off in the future. So I'm just so curious what this season is going to end up being, because some things happen in this episode that I wouldn't have expected to happen this early in the season. And so again, I'm just curious to see where this season goes and where the team behind it decide to take it and what they're going to continue to say about, corporate culture. And there's a lot in this episode and our world around us through where they take this show. Because I think some interesting doors are going to open for them to explore now that some characters have made certain decisions. And I'm curious. I am back to just being made of questions and curious to see where this show is going to go.
Yeah, this episode really has a lot of momentum. Like, we are barreling forward faster, as you mentioned, than we might have even expected from the show. I think especially because the way that season 1 is structured is truly a slow burn. Like, we spend so much time world building, showcasing all of these really strange things that are whetting our palate to really reveal some things that happen much later in the season, really even in the last episode of season 1. And so that slow burn trajectory, I was kind of expecting as well with episode 3 and just the nature of the show. But like you mentioned, there are some big choices that are made that feel like really push the plot forward significantly and happen even earlier than expected. And I think that's going to be really fascinating to see, because that sense of forward momentum is going to really shake up this world and potentially restructure the whole game board of who we know our characters to be and where they're going to go next. And so that's really exciting because I think that's the thing that I found frustrating with the show in season 1 is just how much of a slow burn it was. And I'm energized by episode 3. I think episode 2, I was like, oh no, here we go again. We're doing the same thing. And episode 3 is getting me excited because we're really barreling forward in this world. There's also some really great world building moments, particularly with Milchek, that I absolutely loved in this show. And I think is a testament to the way that this show is unafraid to go to those places that really reveal the dynamics that exist in our society with sometimes these like toxic and unhealthy and really misguided corporate agendas. And so I love the fearlessness of the show to be unafraid to go there. And that also is exciting to me and energizing to me for the show because they are not shy and they're willing to take those big leaps and shine a light on some of these dynamics within like diversity and inclusion, race, and how we talk about and how we try to create opportunity for people in the corporate environment. The show is like playing in every realm that is important and not afraid to go there. So that is energizing for me too, because I trust the show to really not be shy, and that's thrilling to me.
Yeah. And I love that you described this episode as like momentum, because there is a lot of that in this. And one of the struggles that I had in season 1 is I was just like, what are we doing? Like, Mark, what are we doing? And in this episode, we see that Mark has a real sense of purpose and he has a goal that he's working toward. And, all of the characters have their own goals as well, but it's just nice to see these characters, even though they don't have all of the information, they aren't completely in the dark anymore. And they're like, okay, we're gonna try and solve this thing, or we're going to try and answer this question. And it's just nice to see that sense of purpose in these characters. And I think that makes it a little bit easier for me to be along for the journey because I know the goal that we're working toward.
Yeah. And I think that's why episode 2 maybe didn't work as well for me, and episode 3 really does. I was thinking a little bit about that because episode 3 is so focused on the innies of these characters, and inherently they have such clarity in what their goals are and what their mission is, and they're running in that direction. And I do think that obviously everything that's happening and the plot points with the Audi versions of themselves are important too, but I loved that we spent all of our time inside of Lumen with these innies that are trying to overthrow the system and find answers. And that is inherently really exciting to follow. And so I think that's also why this episode works really well for me personally, is like we just get to spend all this time with these characters that have such conviction.
Yeah, they're on it. They're ready.
Yep.
Let's go.
Yep. Okay, well, let's give a spoiler alert, shall we? So we can really talk about this episode. If you haven't watched episode 3 yet, we are diving right in. This is definitely an episode that is worth going in blind and letting yourself go on this journey. So definitely stop listening if you haven't watched this episode yet, because there's a lot that happens in this one. Okay, lots of reveals, lots of big moments. Sarah, what is one of the ones that really stuck out to you?
I mean, Jen, we have to talk about the goats.
We do.
These goats have been driving you crazy for literal years. And now we get to see into the goat room and the people who are taking care of the goats.
When I was on my whole goat shtick through season 1, I really wasn't sure if it actually meant anything, because like I wouldn't put it past the show to have just some like strange little detail that is like jarring and odd, but like, is just artsy fartsy, interesting symbolism of some kind for a moment. And I just love that we live in the multiverse strand where the goats actually mean something. And we start off the episode with Mark and Helly literally having a whole conversation about how we're gonna find the goat man and there's possibly other goat people. And then Helly asks, like, what happens if we see Miss Casey in a goat cage? And I'm just like, this was made for me. Like I have been waiting for these answers, and they really seem to mean a lot to the world of the show and what Lumen's up to. There's a whole goat room. There's people that are dressed like goats. I have gotten all that I want and so much more, and I'm so pleased about it.
Yeah, the second that they started talking about the goats, I was like, wow, Jen is going to live her best life while watching this episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Because sometimes you have these fixations and they really mean nothing, and you're like, okay, well, I had a theory, but like the show's not going to go there. And the show just gives me a whole Vegas buffet to chew on. So that was thrilling. I feel very rewarded.
Good. I am glad. I wish that we learned more
Yeah.
about it's so funny because we obviously we spend all of this time in the goat room, and I love how they staged all of that. I mean, it's a whole hill that these goats are roaming on in this giant room, but we also have a desk and a vending machine and like these parts of corporate culture that are still present here in this goat room. But I find it funny that we spend so much time there, and it feels so satisfying to learn that the goats are important in some way. But we also don't learn anything else.
Nope.
Like, we don't know why the goats are there. We don't know why there's this whole like division of Lumen that is dedicated to caring for the goats in this building. Like, we walk away with so many more questions than answers, which is very smart of the show. But at the same time, you feel so satisfied because you've unlocked this new part of Lumen, and we don't know what it's going to reveal over time, but we know
the goats mean
that there's something there. The goats mean something. They weren't just random and weird. Ugh, wow. So satisfying.
I feel so seen. Yeah, I think that the show has given, as the show does, enough for us to be like, wow, that was a big reveal, but I still don't know anything about what's happening. And they have, Severance is so good at this because they have these conversations that carry so much weight. You know, there's such intensity of emotion and dialogue between them and the good people, but we don't know why. But we just know that there's obviously something big here. You know, the way that the goat people are incredibly combative and immediately try and kill them, you know, and they talk about the bellies and the fact that there's no pouches. Like, there's so much like conversation and reveals that happened, and it's like we get the top, like the crust of the earth, but we have no idea what's inside, and all of the like layers beneath it are still so far from our understanding. And I think Severance does a great job of that because it's a perfect balance of us feeling satisfied of like we've revealed something, but we have no idea what it is. We just get almost the facts without the meaning and why behind it. So the bellies and the pouches, what does it mean? They seem surprised that Mark S. and Helly don't have pouches, which suggests that they do. But why do they have pouches? Like, we have no idea. And I think that's the genius of the show, is that we're satisfied, but also the insight that we gain reveals like exponentially more questions and opens up a whole world of questions for us. And that's what the goat scenes do in this episode as well.
Which is just brilliant because we get enough so that we feel as though we're making progress.
Yeah.
And we feel satisfied, and we still have so many more questions that we have to keep watching.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's brilliant in keeping us just going on this journey with these characters.
It's such a false sense of progress. Like, it feels really satisfying in the moment, you know, but then the show ends and you're like, wait, I think I was ShamWowed because I think I felt like I had a lot that I just learned, but now I realize I don't, you know. Perhaps it's a lot of the way that people describe like learning. The more that you learn, the more that you realize you don't know. And I think that's Severance to a T, is you gain a little tiny detail and now you've like populated about 100 more questions. But I guess that's part of the thrill of the show too, is like this uncovering of the world. And as we uncover more, the concepts of the world expand significantly. And so we just are voraciously wanting to consume more.
Yeah. There's always something more for us to learn
Yeah.
about and experience. And this world is just so interesting and so layered, and you can tell that they have written such a rich backstory to this world and how it operates in this company and how it operates, and it's just interesting to try and learn more about it because it's so weird.
Yep.
And yet it also just like mirrors our world too, which I think is another really fascinating piece of it. So we will have to continue to be curious about the goats because they do mean something. We don't know what yet though, but we're happy to continue digging into what the heck is Lumen and what the heck are they doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. The question remains looming. What Lumen is doing. Wow, that was dropping some rhymes there.
Yeah, look at you.
Oh man. Okay. Let's talk about some other big things that happen. Dylan specifically, meets his outie wife. Tell me your thoughts about that whole scene.
Man, I don't trust it.
Mhm.
I when they were first like taking him, I was like, is she his wife? I was like, is that
Yeah.
also like a severed
A paid
worker, or
actor.
did they hire like an actor to play?
Yeah.
Like I was like, what are we doing here? Cuz there's no way that they would bring his actual wife to meet him, but it would appear that that is actually what happened, and I find that kind of surprising cuz that feels like not the move. So I wonder what I have so many questions about her
Yeah.
specifically because when we see her in the outside world, she seems to be wearing some sort of a uniform, maybe like a cop or a security guard uniform, it looked like to me. And so I'm very curious about her and how she plays into this as well. Obviously, this is a helpful tool to keep Dylan working while everybody else is not working. So everything is still getting done. But I don't know. I feel like they spend so much time on her. There must be a lot more to her, and I would imagine she's going to play a more pivotal role in the future. So I'm curious about that because they spend so much time there in this episode.
Yeah. I, like you, also thought that that wife character that Dylan meets was a paid actor. I was like, there's no way. This is just some random person that they told within Lumen that is, like you said, a severed worker who is just playing this role and taught to play this role. And I thought it was such a fun subversion of our expectation for the show to then give us this scene later to showcase, oh, no, this is his wife in the outside world. And now there really must be something that is not as it seems. And the way that the show almost knows that we are suspicious as well and says, yes, we know that you were thinking down this direction, but we're going to give you another detail that's actually more surprising, that this is his wife, seemingly on the outside world. And now we know even more questions. It's actually more intriguing for this to be his wife on the outside world that still has agreed to do this. That's more exciting, actually, than this just being a severed worker and the show letting us believe that she's just a severed worker or being suspicious about that. And the way that the show knows our mistrust of the system and then is playing with that and almost using that against us in a fun way to then get us to say, oh, okay, well, once again, Lumen has surprised us. And so there's got to be even more that's behind this, that his wife is somehow being manipulated to be a part of this system in some way. And there's more to her. She becomes far more intriguing to us as a character versus her just being some unnamed woman who is a paid actor in our previous hypothesis that got debunked. So I think that's a really fun screenwriting choice that was made that I think was pretty genius. And then especially the way that his wife that is speaking to Dylan Inney essentially insinuates and confirms to Innie Dylan that his outie is kind of a fuck up is really interesting. And when you extrapolate that out into the themes and how that relates to our real world dynamics, like this lie and this manipulative tactic being used by the corporation to kind of insinuate to you that like you are your work, and that is like your way to find purpose and worth and value, is to give yourself over to this, is a really fascinating insinuation from the show as well, of the way that any Dylan believing that his Audi is a fuck up and that him being at Lumen is a way to like earn his worth and to like redeem himself, is a system of control and a system to get any Dylan to be continuing to be satisfied and to believe that it's best for him to be working here. And so I think that's also a fascinating emotional dynamic that is being used by Lumen to keep any Dylan basically loyal to the system.
Yeah, it's really interesting because these tactics are working. You know, we see everybody else is going off on their side missions. You know, Irv is hanging out in O&D, and Helly and Mark go find the goat room, and Dylan is still there, clicky clacking away at his computer looking for the scary numbers. So we see how this tactic for manipulation, it's working. And I also love that this episode shows the contrast between these two versions of Dylan. And we see that Dylan is the Dylan that we've spent the most time with, is very dedicated, and he is competitive, and he wants to do a good job, and he wants to succeed, and he has this drive to him. And so then it's really fascinating that he is learning that this other version of himself doesn't seem to have that. And so that I'm very curious to see how that is going to affect him. Because I mean, obviously the reward of learning about your other life and your family and all of this, like, that's a great motivator to keep you going. But is that knowledge that this other part of you isn't what you dreamed it would be, is that going to fester in Dylan and like mess him up a little bit? So I'm curious to see what they do with this character, because Dylan is just so fascinating as a character just in general, I think, and brings so much to the show. And I'm curious what this additional knowledge and this form of manipulation is going to do to him, and how it might actually end up backfiring on Lumen. So it's going to be interesting to see if it succeeds or if it backfires, depending on how Dylan processes all of this new information.
That's a really interesting like thought exercise and thing to ponder, which is the way that your innie and your outie self are similar or different, and how does the severance process maybe draw out other sides of you that maybe in your outie self are a little bit more suppressed or have not been activated, and yet in your innie version those have space now to be able to come out and be fully realized, you know. And so it's because you talking about the outie versus innie Dylan is fascinating to see the contrast. And then I remember in our previous episode, you were also talking about the difference between Helena and her outie and her innie self, and how different they are. And so there's these traits in us that almost are not fully realized in one version of our lives, that maybe because of the severance process, those half of our brain cells like have space to be able to really take flight. And so that's a fascinating thing to continue to like view these characters as they develop throughout the show through that lens of how are their innie and outie versions similar or different? Are they wildly contrasted? And like, what are those things that we're seeing glimpses of in both their outie self or their innie self that are maybe suppressed or a little bit smaller in volume in the other version, and yet are full blast in the alternate side of them? And so that's going to be fascinating to think about. And then, you know, what does that say about who we are as human beings today in our actual lives, and all of these traits in us that maybe are there, but are different volumes of them have been drawn out because of our life experience and the environments we were shaped by, that certain traits have room to be expressed, and other ones are maybe there but have not been activated yet or are a little bit more dormant. And so that's a fascinating thought exercise and all the implications of it for like essentially the question of like what makes us the way that we are as human beings, and why different environments might bring out different sides of us is cool.
And I think that's why I'm so intrigued by Helena, because obviously she is in this position where she has to be put together and emotionless and ruthless and cunning and like all of these things. She is so in control all the time. And she has been formed that way, and she has been taught and prepared, and like, this is the lane that you need to run in. And so then her seeing this other side of her that is able to be free and express herself and be loud and passionate and all of these things that Helena can't be because of how she has been, I don't know, conditioned to act in the world. I'm so curious what they're going to do with Helena, because I think there's a lot of really fun and exciting things they could potentially do with that character if she starts to become a little bit more like Helly along the way. I don't know. We'll see where the show decides to go, but I'm so intrigued.
Yeah. Yeah. She seems to be like bursting at the seams. Like there's so much suppression and calculation in the way that she operates in the world for Helena. But you see that in those conversations with Cobell, like she is in control, but it is not because she has no emotion. It is there. It is just being wielded in a certain way. And so, yeah, that's going to be exciting. Like how will outside Helena potentially be? You can't hold it together for that long. No human can, you know what I mean? And she's gone through so much shaping and molding, I'm sure, by being part of the Egan cult. So that's just a ticking time bomb.
Well, and I think part of it is also like, if you've, and I mean, obviously we don't know anything about Helena. We know very, very little about her. But if you have been in this bubble and this is how you act and this is how you do things and this is how everybody acts and this is how everybody does things and this is just the norm and this is how you be a human. And then if you see something outside of that, that can spark your imagination to understand that there's a different way of being. And so that's why I think in the previous episode, I really loved that moment when she was watching herself on that little screen. And like, what could that spark in her imagination of another way to be that maybe she had never considered, or maybe she had dreamed of being able to like live differently, but never had the courage to actually like take those steps. But now maybe she's seen a version of herself doing that and she might be able to break out of this mold. I don't know. This is probably like applying way too much like positive thinking to Helena, who is an agent of Lumen. But man, I really want just a little bit of that Helly-ness to just like infect Helena and just start to, I just want her to start like blowing stuff up, because I think that would be really fun.
Like her and Cobell, you know what I mean? Like they both have this raw energy that if them two, which I know they're foes right now, but if they came together, can you imagine the chaos that would ensue? It'd be great. If they were aligned in their goals.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I would love it. And also,
honestly, I'm down for like Helena Harmony face.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that would also be fun. Like,
okay.
Let's just, because that would also be chaotic, because I feel like Harmony would bring her madness in and Helena would no longer be able to keep the mask on and chaos would ensue. I just want chaos is really what I'm looking for here, apparently.
Oh, that's what we love to see. We're here sitting in our comfy little couches, just wanting to see chaos unfold on screen. That is television and movies. It's storytelling, really, at its core. Chaos, and then sometimes the chaos can be cleaned up, sometimes not. That's okay, but we would like to see some things go on a whole journey. But yeah, it would be a fascinating thesis of the show, too, to see what they do with those two. There's, the more optimistic version of the show that's maybe less cynical, where we get to see these two women that are banded together that can, like, take down the system. You know what I mean? I think that would be really fun. Very much a more, one, hopeful view, because we get to see these two women join together. But then two, the fact that the system can be taken down is inherently a hopeful and inspiring and maybe positive outlook, like the systems that are in control are not invincible. That's really inspiring for us, here in the real world. But there's another version of this where like them two go at each other, self-destruct, and Lumen continues to maintain their control even at all of the attempts from the innies and the uprising and all that kind of stuff. Like they are still far beyond what we small little humans can do to take down the systems of technology and science and corporate power and large scale organizations. The unnamed, faceless, the board are the powers that be. They're pulling out they're the puppet masters. They're calling all the shots. Like that's the very cynical version of the way that the show's going to play out too.
Yeah. So I think this season is going to just be so interesting to see how the show views our world. And are they going to give us the hopeful version? Or are they going to give us the maybe more realistic, cynical version? Or will they land somewhere in the middle? Or honestly, just not do any of that and do something completely different, which is what I feel like the show keeps doing. So I don't know. The good news is we're going to be here and we're going to watch it all and then talk about it afterwards. So it's going to be fun.
Absolutely. Okay, time is flying. I want to make sure that we hit on two other big things that happen in this episode. The first one, obviously, is the Mark reintegration ending of the episode. Tell me your thoughts on that. I'm saving my favorite one for last.
Yeah.
With Milchick.
Yes, I think you're also saving my favorite one for last. So that's perfect. I'm just surprised that we got here and we got here so quickly. And I just I'm the person that asks all the wrong questions because I was like, how did Rugabi find Mark? Just chilling at this like random, presumably isolated location? Why was she just chilling there? I don't understand.
Right.
And then
I had the question.
He just very quickly agrees to the reintegration process, and it's like, okay, bet, let's go. I got all my equipment. Let's move it all into your basement and let's get this done. Like, excuse? We're doing this so quickly. I'm here for Rugabi. I think she's great, but I just have a lot of questions. Who were you at Lumen? How do you know all of this stuff? How have you improved the technology since you did this to Petey and it ended very badly? Like, can we get some scientific studies done? Can you show me the data that this is going to be okay? Like, what are we doing? But the show isn't concerned about all of that. So I'm just interested to see where this goes from here because I wouldn't have expected Mark to get here so quickly, and it's only the third episode of the season out of, I think there's 10 episodes this season. So that's a lot of runway for this. And we saw what happened to Petey. So hopefully technology has improved and Mark doesn't face the same fate, but we're going to find out.
Yeah, I think I'm appreciative that it's happening so that we can do something with it next for the rest of the show. And there's just so much like that's now propelling forward. But I do think that the decisions that are made and the emotional moments to get us there happened so quickly. They happened within like a 5-minute last little sequence, and I think it would have been more meaningful for perhaps Mark to take a little bit of time, like half an episode, to wrestle with this a little bit and think about the implications, but ultimately decide to do this. And so, yeah, I think it's a little bit written a little fast, a little rushed, but perhaps we're propelling onto something next that we don't know about. But I agree with you that I think it's too fast. The setup for it is a little bit clunky, like she just shows up outside of his car. It's all very strange. I was like, I actually thought I missed a scene. Not gonna lie. I went back to rewatch right before it because I was like, I thought he was outside of Lumen in his car, but then now all of a sudden he's somewhere else and she happens to show up right in that moment. And so it all is a little clunky, but you know what? We're getting momentum. So I'm like, I'll take it.
And I do think, like, it did feel really rushed to me, but I think that's also sometimes how we make decisions as humans. Like in season 1, they do have an encounter and she's kind of explaining the whole thing to him. So presumably this procedure has been kind of in the back of his mind for however long it's been since that scene. But still, that's not a long period of time. But I do think while rushed, it is probably indicative of how a lot of us make decisions of like, oh, yep, let's just get it done. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Screw it. I'm ready for something different. I am ready to be out of this situation. Fix it. And that's kind of how I read that moment, even though I was like, wow, I am not there with you, Mark, but okay, buddy, you make this decision.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it there's a part of it that makes sense too, because he has suppressed his emotions for so long about processing his wife. And so it comes as the floodgates are open, you know, and his whole season 1 journey was basically him running from processing by doing the severance procedure and starting this whole life and buying into the severed surgery system that is in place by Lumen. And so it makes sense that even the thought of being able to see her again just moves him so quickly. So I think the bigger problem is not like maybe Mark's decision, but just the way that she even shows up and the setup of that just comes out of left field a little bit. But that's fine.
Right?
She just happens
she's
to be
just
there.
like lurking around. Maybe she put a trap
Right?
around his car.
I mean,
I don't
that would
know.
make sense, you know? Like, hey, Petey, your friend did this. You're my next likely person that would be open to this. And you led the
Right.
Macrodate uprising. Like, what better person to go through this? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and she knew like what he was trying to do too.
Yeah.
Like, how did she know all of this? Like, is she a mind reader? Is she a wizard? Like, what's going on here? I need to know so much more about this person. I hope we get more time with her because she seems fascinating. She has so much institutional knowledge. And I'm like, how are you outside and do you know all of this? How have they kept you alive for this long? Like, I don't know.
Yep.
I'm a fan, but I need some more information.
Yeah. Okay. The next, I think, big thing that I think maybe is both of our favorite things, scenes, sequences that happens in this episode is Milchek receiving the painting of Kier that's meant to look more like him. Tell me your thoughts on that sequence. So good.
It's so good.
It's
Oh
genius.
my gosh. It really is. And I was watching this episode unfold and I was like, wow, are they really they're going there. Okay, let's go. I am on this journey. And I mean, just fantastic writing, great performances. We have sung the praises of Tremel Tillman since the jump. Like, we have loved him from the start of this show, and he is fantastic in that scene. And there's that moment when he is processing through receiving these, and Natalie responds that she has also received these. And the board is still present. And there's so much tension in that moment because you can see on his face a flood of emotions and that control and knowing he cannot express himself in this moment because it is not a safe place to express himself. And then him and Natalie just have a whole conversation just with their eyes in that moment because they cannot say anything because there are unsafe ears listening. So it was just, there's so much in that. It's so well done. And as we've already mentioned, so indicative of so much corporate culture too. And it's just, it's powerful and profound and scathing all in one.
It's so good. And the detail too of giving a painting of Kier to be made to look like Milchek is so perfectly misguided you know? And it's so reflective of the way that sometimes corporations are misguided in their attempts to try and make people feel seen and understood and heard. Like, it's all of the wrong things. The intention might be fine and maybe even sometimes coming from a great place, but the complete lack of understanding of what underrepresented people groups need in this environment to feel seen and to do it in such a shallow way is so scathing, as you mentioned, of the way that these organizations try to create space and to make this feel like a safe place. And it, in a way, does, like you mentioned, the opposite, because it is the lack of ability to see, and then the way that it is so mismatched from what those people need to feel safe and understood is almost worse. It's like when you try and understand me and you just completely miss the mark, it's actually worse because it's indicative of how much you didn't from the beginning versus then when you didn't even try at all, right? And so it's fascinating to see the way that Milchick also responds by just squeezing out the words barely when he says, "It's meaningful to see myself reflected in." And notable too that he doesn't finish his sentence. It's almost like he can't even finish saying the words. And you see how uncomfortable it is. And we've seen Milchick so confident and vibrant and charismatic, and he plays his role well of kind of carrying out the systems of control and power and manipulation of Lumen for all of season 1, all of season 2 up until this point. He's always got a smile on his face and seems to be in control and to feel confident in his place. And you see how much he is so wildly uncomfortable by this moment. And I think that's really fascinating. The other detail that's interesting too is, like you mentioned, Natalie also receiving this and then also being the one to give it to him. There's so much commentary there around the way that underrepresented people groups have this knowing and yet all have to feel like they need to yield to the system. And so, man, there's so much here that I think is so interesting. One other detail that I thought was notable that I wanted to mention is that after Natalie gets off the phone with the board, she says to Milchick, "Congratulations, Seth," and uses his name. And I don't know if we ever heard Milchick's name before. I don't remember it if we have. But even that intimacy of using his first name with him as a way to showcase, like, I see you. I know that, like, we are here working in this place that does not see you at all. But yeah, there's so much that's loaded there. I still don't know how to place her, but it was notable to me that she uses his first name. There might be also some power play thing there too, of like her kind of insinuating that she knows a lot more and she's got the in with the board and whatnot. But there's so much that's mixed in there. But I thought it is notable that she recognizes and sees him far more than like anybody else in their orbit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's also interesting. I'm curious what they're gonna do with Natalie for her as a Black woman to be the mouthpiece of this board that is clearly insensitive and unaware and just, man, not great. We don't even know what Lumen is doing, and we know that the board is shady as hell, and they've chosen to use this Black woman as their mouthpiece. I think that that's really interesting, and I'm curious to see what drives Natalie, because we're seeing a little bit more of her as well. So are they going to do more with this character, and what part is she going to play in this? And I mean, if she's the one that's constantly talking for the board, she probably knows some stuff. So what is Natalie thinking? What is she going to do?
Who
knows?
knows? Yeah, but that is a whole fascinating storyline. And Natalie is clearly aware. I think that that's a fascinating part of her performance from that actress. I'll have to pick up her name. But there's a look in her eye where she knows and is clear-minded about what the system is doing. She's not like blindly bought in, and I think that's going to be really fascinating to see if when she decides to make choices, what will they be? Because she is seeing and perceiving everything, and she's not blindly bought into the entire system, which is a fascinating detail as well. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, should we give out some TVNS awards? Let's do it. All right. The first category is for Employee of the Week. What is your choice for this one?
Yeah, I want to give this to Felicia for bonding with Irv.
Mm-hmm.
She did not seem to be a big fan of Irv in season 1. And in this episode, they're having a whole great time. They're reminiscing. She gives him a hug. Like, it's just such a sweet moment. And she presumably drops some really helpful information for him. But I loved seeing this, like, really warm side of Felicia.
It's so funny because that's my same choice, actually. Yeah,
Wow!
I wrote in here Felicia
Amazing.
giving Irving a hug. Yeah, I thought that was a really meaningful moment. And man, that hug hit home for me too. You know, we are in such a sterile environment here that I felt for Irv the warmth, like you mentioned, of that hug, and how starved they are of like real human connection and affection with each other. That moment just shines so brightly for the way that she embraces him. And I thought that was meaningful and notable. So, yeah, Felicia for being just a warm human being in this place that is really, really sterile.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like those people, they're like a safe person, and they gave really good hugs, and it just turns your whole day around. Like, it felt like one of those. Like, way to go, Felicia. Way to use that good hug superpower.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is. Okay, the next category is Move the Needle Moment. What is your choice?
Yeah, it's what we were just talking about. Milchick getting the quote-unquote inclusive artwork.
Which, like, that word and that phrase in itself is just so, it's so good. It's so problematic. Oh, it's terrible.
They really nailed it with this episode.
That tickled my brain in all of the best ways. I was like, this is genius writing. Every detail down to a perfectly written to a T. So good. Okay, my choice for Move the Needle moment is just goats, goats, and goats. Goats all around. Every goat scene, just moving my needle in the direction of joy.
Oh, yes. And we need those goats to give us some joy.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
Okay, then third category is Achievement in Corporatees. What is your choice for this one?
So I want to give this to Natalie when she said, "The board is jubilant at your ascendance."
My choice is the line from Milchick right before that one, which is so funny.
Nice. That was my runner-up.
Yep. I want to thank the board humbly for my recent betterment.
Oh, it's just so perfect.
We just don't talk as human beings in the corporate space. It's so funny. Oh, wow. That, again, some great writing. Great writing. Nailed it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, looking ahead, I'm sure we're buzzing with a million things that we're excited for to look ahead for and to be excited about in the next episode. What is some big ones on your list?
I mean, like, obviously, Mark's reintegration. Yep. What's going to happen there? But I think a lot of things that we already talked about, like what is going to happen with Helena. Is Ragabi going to show up and play more of a role? Will we learn more about her? Will we see the goats again? And then, like, what is this larger project that everybody's working on? And why is Mark S so important to Lumen? Like, of all people, why Mark S? So I think I'm just made of questions at this point, and I am not expecting any of them to get answered, is kind of where I'm at. But we'll see. Mm-hmm. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everything that we said throughout the episode so far, the two that I will add is I'm still curious about Miss Wong and what's happening there. There's some child labor stuff that I think would be interesting for the show to explore, but also, like, is she Mark and Gemma's child that they insinuated so heavily in episode 1 or 2? Like, there's just so many questions there, and I hope we get some answers. And then an interesting shot of Cobell driving, and it cuts to a view of her passenger seat, and there's like a hospital bracelet and a breathing tube. And so there's something there too. A lot of people, interestingly, on TikTok had the theory around Cobell having a daughter that was potentially like manipulated and used by Lumen in some way, being they were kind of onto that from season 1, because in the shots of Cobell's shrine to Kier, there seems to that seems to be in the corner with like a name on it or something. I don't know. People are really perceptive and really mining for details, which is fascinating to see all of the theories that come out of it. So this dedicated shot of the passenger seat with that as Cobell's driving seems to be such a suggestion too of Cobell's motivations, which I think are still unknown to us. So interesting to see what they do with Cobell's whole storyline, backstory, and how that motivates her to make some choices.
Yeah, because she is making some choices here too. I think that's another piece that we didn't really talk about, is her confrontation with Helena. And I think it's really interesting that we've seen this before, these two going toe to toe, and we get it again here. And this time Harmony really shuts it down. You know, in the first episode, she's like, okay, no, thank you. I don't think I want this, but like really politely refuses. And then in this one, she's like, screw this, I'm gone. So I think how Harmony is growing increasingly erratic is going to be really interesting to just see what she does. Because, I mean, in the previous episode, she almost ran over Mark. In this one, she's like speeding out of the parking lot, like just pedal to the metal madness. So I don't know. Lots going on with Harmony. We'll see how much time the show dedicates to her, though, and to her story.
Yeah. There's so many storylines for us to follow. It is wild. We are feasting out here. So, okay. Well, this was our review and discussion of episode 3 of Severance. You can find available to stream on Apple TV+. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continue our tumultuous, thrilling journey through Severance Season 2. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about episode 3. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at tvnspod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss episode 4 as we continue our journey. So we hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with y'all very soon.